So we're just going to quickly read out the test results here. So let's have a read. So over the past few weeks, they've been running basically different days where they've been doing different MMR testing where they've been completely changing it. So they've actually said they've made it faster, stricter, various combination in between, and yes, even disabling skill-based matchmaking and reverting to the old grade-based matchmaking, which I felt like they did on some days. I want to start by thanking everyone who took part and shared their thoughts. Okay. This is a long and technical one, so we'll go through it. I haven't read this myself, so let's just quickly go through this and see what we're going to do. So the variables, we have a bunch of settings which we can tweak behind the scenes. Here's a quick rundown on the ones we changed during the tests. The first is the maximum range. I mentioned this actually. I said that it was a range thing to do with your MMR and like the highest you can do. When you search for a match, we try and find other players who are close to your rating within 50 points. If we aren't able to do so, we search gradually expanding until we're able to find you a match. By default, this is set to 500 points away from your own rating. This is so that you're guaranteed to get a match after waiting a while, though it may not be the fairest. The second is expansion time. This is how long it takes to reach the maximum range. By default, this is set to 5 minutes. Then we have a few switches we can toggle. These are bi-directional matchmaking. Normally, once one player has been waiting long enough, other players can be pulled into their match as long as they're within the maximum range. Bidirectional matchmaking requires both players have expanded enough to encompass each other for each to be pulled into the same match. By default, this is off. This may sound confusing, don't worry, it's complicated. Here's a little chart to clear things up. Player A, player B. So I'm guessing the red is the rank and the blue is after the timer they can see. And all they've done is make it so that it's slightly bigger for player B. I see. Kind of interesting, isn't it? So they made it more balanced this way. Each player's actual rating is shown in red and their current matchmaking search is shown in blue. In example 1, player's A search has been expanded to cover to player B, but player B has not yet expanded to cover player A, so they won't be matched together. In example 2, both players have expanded enough to cover each other, so now they can match together. Oh, I see. So basically, if player A is waiting in a lobby and doesn't find a game, player B will slowly, that blue bar will slowly go up, and once it hits past the red, they'll match. Okay, that makes sense. Grade visibility. This one's nice and simple. We can switch off grades. Yeah, we've seen that already. They can switch on and off your grades. Grade-based matchmaking. We can switch off skill-based matchmaking entirely and instead use grades for matchmaking. For folks who joined us recently, this is roughly how the matchmaking works before MMR. Yep. The tests. So now the part you've been waiting for, just exactly what did they test each day. So let's just go through every day and talk about what they did for each test. So on March 28th, the expansion time decreased to 1 minute from 5 minutes. Faster matches, particularly for players with off-peak time, so the quality of matches would be lower. Results, as expected, wait times dropped significantly across the board, faster than any other day, especially for players with extreme ends of the spectrum. The quality of matches on average did not change a whole lot, though some players may have noticed a larger gap in skill levels. Kill rates noticeably changed on the ends of the spectrum, with high-rated killers becoming more deadly and low-rated killers having a harder time. This is likely due to players on the ends of the spectrum being paired with players from the middle. So basically, March 28th, which actually felt like a really baby day, you're finding games extremely fast, but you're being paired with new players. So that just means if you're really high in the game, it just means you're going to be paired with babies because there's more babies in the game than there are, high-level players. So March 29th, maximum range decreased to 250 from 500. This one made it, in my opinion, it was the sweatiest day, and I bet that's what it is. Slower matches, especially for players with extraordinarily high low ratings and off-peak hours, but higher quality matches in general. Like we predicted, wait times did increase for players on either end of the spectrum, although players in the middle did not have a noticeable impact on these matchmaking times on average. Overall, this test only slightly reduced the average rating difference compared to non-test day. So, curiously, players on the far ends of the spectrum may have seen an increase. So if you're top of the MMR chain, you probably went against better players. Wait, hold on. Maximum range decreased to 250 from 500. That means you are less likely to go against new players because the range of where you can find people is a lot lower. So you're going to be paired against, players more likely to your skill, even though you were waiting longer. So that was just one of the sweatiest days. I remember on the MMR testing, day 2 was like really sweaty. March 30th, enable bi-directional matchmaking. Longer queue times for players in off-peak hours and players at the extreme end of the rating spectrum, but fairer matches for players that get matched quickly. Results, longer queue times were an understatement. Some players were experiencing exceptionally long queue times. This is because there weren't enough players to match them against in their region and skill at the same time they were playing, and players who were close enough to their skill would not get matched with them unless they were unable to find a match. This is longer than we'd ever like anyone to wait. To play it safe, we cut this test short and altered it in a few hours in. A hard cap was added to switch back to the undirectional matchmaking after someone had been waiting for 5 minutes. This cap was used for future tests where bidirectional matchmaking was used. Of all the tests, this one reduced the average rating difference the most, cutting it roughly a third. However, the long queue times make it a very unappealing solution. I think people would rather have a quicker game than wait for like 15 minutes. That's crazy. March 31st, maximum range decreased to 250 from 500. Expansion time decreased to 1 minute from 5 minutes. Expectation. Players who already get quick matches may notice a slight drop in quality, but players on their find matches quicker. On the other hand, the lower range may limit the pool of players to match with on the far ends of the rating spectrum. Results. Queue times as far as were faster across the board, but killer queue times were no noticeable difference. In terms of kill rates, on the mid-high end skill groups, kill rates dropped slightly, closer to 50%. Damn. While the lower groups remained mostly the same. The test also earned the second biggest reduction in average rating difference tests. That was also another sweaty day. So what I'm seeing is when they decrease the range, your games are going to be so sweaty. 250 from 500 is actually a huge difference. So yeah, really sweaty games. But they made it so that you find the games somewhat quicker. 1 minute to reach the max. But even then, it was still sweaty games. Slightly. But 50%. To lose 50% of kill rates. That's insane. So on this day, killers were getting bullied a lot. 50% of kill rates were dropped. That's because killers have been paired with people like around their MMR very quickly. And 250 isn't a lot. That's nuts. If they keep this is going to be bad. I'm just telling you now. Every game is going to be a fucking sweat. April 4th, maximum range decreased to 350 from 500. So basically done the same thing, but 350 instead of 250. Matchmaking may be slower for some players, but quality of matches should be improved. Survivor queue times were faster across the board, while killer queue times remain mostly the same, with the exception of the far low rating of the spectrum. Kill rates, meanwhile, climbed slightly at the highest skill levels and remained mostly unchanged at the low end. The average rating difference didn't decrease noticeably with this test. So killers were just doing slightly better, and the queue time seemed okay. Right. April 7th, maximum range decreased to 350 from 500. Expansion time decreased to 1 minute from 5 minutes, and they enabled bi-directional matchmaking, and the grades were hidden. Expectation, more or less the same results. Previous tests, all variables the same. Results, we were curious to see what kind of impact hiding grades would have on the feedback we received, since grades are no longer used for matchmaking. Yes. For this test, we ran the same variables, only we hid the grades as well. This way we can compare feedback to the previous test to see how grades would affect the sentiment. To our surprise, the overall feedback appeared slightly more positive with grades hidden. When directional comparing opinions with folks who left feedback from April 4th and 7th test, we discovered that feedback was usually the same, if not better when the grades were hidden. We opted to leave grades hidden over the weekend, yep. 11th and 12th, switch to grades-based matchmaking. This is how it used to be. So let's see what they thought about how it used to be. These tests were added later and we started to see more speculation about the tests. Occasionally someone would predict that one of the things we're testing were the old matchmaking system, and we figured, hey, why not give it a shot? Their expectation with matches would have a lot more variety in player skill, very similar to the old rank-based matchmaking. We also expected to see an average grade difference to fall dramatically. Results, as we suspected, reports of one-sided matches started flooding in. We could also confirm this on our end. The average kill rates for this day saw the most dramatic change yet, with the highest skill levels rocketing up to roughly 80%, 3 kills per match on average, and plummeting to around 20%, 1 kill per match on average on the lower end of the spectrum. The average grade difference, however, decreased significantly as expected. So on this day, killers were smashing it. Absolutely smashing it. And the lower end killers were getting bullied, basically. So now to be clear, this is not quite the same as the old based matchmaking. For starters, grades we set all the way back to bronze, while ranks only reset one color tier, and it's not possible to lose grades anymore. We want to give it a fair shot, so we specifically set out the test so that the grade result reset as possible to give people the largest window to settle into their grades. This is also why the last day was cut short. We didn't want to leave the test running over the grade reset. Okay. Furthermore, a 1 to 2 day test is not the same as leaving it for an extended period of time. Given more time and the ability to lose grades, we expect that the people facing far too difficult opponents would eventually have their grades drop to a place where they're more comfortable, while folks who are consistently overperforming would climb. Ultimately, though, this highlights a big issue while using grades for matchmaking. A very experienced player who just hasn't played a lot lately can very easily be paired against players who are new to the game, and we've learned in the past grades and ranks are a stronger indicator of playtime than skill. This test was very polarizing but interesting. We started to see more positive feedback when we started to show grades again. Right, what did they learn from this and what are they going to do? Which is the most important part. We've learned that the strictness of matchmaking and quality of the matches is without a doubt linked. Looser conditions have a notable effect on kill rates, opponent variety, and the feedback we received. While the larger variety in opponents was appreciated by some, there was an opposite reaction from others who were now struggling in tougher matches. Simply put, on the other side of a casual match where one player can win without trying is a person who's having a bad time despite trying their best. On the other hand, the verse is also true. Stricter matchmaking brought the kill rates closer to the middle, but many found the matches to be too competitive to enjoy, while the folks in the lower groups of skill rating would have few unfair matches. The higher end of skill groups ended up tough matches filled with meta perks and killers. Yep. These tests overall highlight two distinct groups. High skill players who want more variety in their matches. Lower mid skill players understandably don't want to get destroyed by high skill players. The biggest takeaway here is that going too far either way is one size fit all solution. Was what we often notice in how players loved a particular test because they were seeing more variety in their opponents, but at the same time, those tests were also frustrating to a lot of people who suddenly get matched with people way better than them. Neither person is wrong in this scenario. Each of them just expects something different from matchmaking. Lastly, we've discovered that hiding grades on a post-match screen definitely influences the feedback we receive. We suspect this is for two reasons. One, long-time players who may have missed their matchmaking changes could still thinking that grades are used for matchmaking. And two, some players still feel that grades are an indicator of skill in spite of them not being used for matchmaking. Most importantly, however, we find that there are a lot of people support for hiding grades, so this is something we'll be considering as a permanent change going forward. They're going to hide your grades because people get confused and think that's your skill when it's got nothing to do with it. Your MMR is actually hidden. MMR is good for new players. It always has been. It's just not good for... The problem with this game is the higher you get in skill, the more boring it is because a lot of skill conditions in this game is just escaping. And people that gen rush, bring meta perks, or even on killer, play Nurse, Blight, Tinker, Pain Resonance, Deadman Switch, the same boring stuff. You're just going to be paired against those people all the time. And someone like me who doesn't really bring sweaty perks unless I'm doing like a best build series or something, just wants to bring a mean build, doesn't want to play too sweaty, I'm always going to get these types of players. So let's see what they're going to say about this. Okay, next steps. With all these learnings in mind, we have a solution now: improved matchmaking for both groups of players. We'll be making the following changes shortly. Reducing the maximum range. Reducing the expansion time proportionally so it's faster or slower than before. Lowering the effective gap for skill ratings. Removing grades from the post-match screen for the foreseeable future. Why these changes? As mentioned in the learnings, we have found two dominant groups. High skill players who want more variety, lower mid skill players who want even matches. In order to make both groups happy, we first need to isolate them from each other. To do this, we'll reduce the maximum expansion range. This will help keep players of similar skill levels together, reducing the number of one-sided matches. The majority of players will fall in the middle of the spectrum, so there will be plenty of people to match with. Additionally, since it seems like expansion is happening at a good rate, we'll be adjusting the expansion time proportionally. Basically, expect sweaty games every game if you're high MMR. Next, we need to consider how this will affect the high skill group. Reducing the range would mean less variety. Fortunately, we have another variable to tweak that solves this issue perfectly. For the purpose of matchmaking, we have a cap for skill ratings. Although your rating can continue to climb beyond this cap, you'll be treated as if you are at the cap for the purposes of matchmaking. This is in place to prevent the best players out there climbing to a point where there's simply nobody to match with. By lowering this cap, we're able to expand the pool of players in high skill matches, leading to more variety in opponents you face. One match may be very close and competitive, but the next may be a little bit more laid back. This will also ensure that the queue times don't go longer at higher skill levels. So basically, like, even if you're like the most cracked Blight sweat main and you always play sweaty, you might randomly get other survivors that don't sweat too much. So it's like random if you're going to win or lose. This feels like how MMR currently is. Lastly, we'll be removing grades from the post-match screen. When we originally hid grades during the test, we saw a lot of people asking for this to be made permanent. Additionally, long-time players who may have missed the news could often think that grades were still used for matchmaking, leading them to feel like the matchmaking was less fair than it actually was. These combined with a general more positive feedback during the test while they're disabled. Okay, that's fine. I don't really care about grades in the in-game chat, to be honest. I don't pay attention to what Survivor's grade is because I know it doesn't affect it. For the future, we're still working hard to implement these changes on the new matchmaking system. These improvements will be longer to implement, but rest assured, work is already underway. You can find a full list, look into the January developer update. Okay. We have no idea when it's coming, but good on Behavior for actually taking the time to address this, and they've actually laid out all of their results, and hopefully something good comes of this. So yeah, hopefully a good change here.